It's weird, you know, you get cartoonists who are so shy and kind of introverted that like it becomes like a half an hour and I have to go pull teeth to get answers out of them. But I would love to have a 90-minute, 2-hour, just let's talk about comics and how fucking awesome comics are.
Comics are great.
They're the best.
Yeah.
How you doing, Jordan? You guys like the book? By the way, before we start, this is a good book, right? Yeah? Did you like it? Yeah? Okay. Miles, I mean, you came out, so you must have liked it, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. All right.
A few pages to go, but
No, that's fine. That's fine. Awesome.
I related a lot to it.
Sweet. Sweet.
Not the violence part, but
Yeah. Depends on which part.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I am.
Let's do this. All right. In 5, 4, 3.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of February. Our choice this month is Spring Rain by Andy Warner. This is a fantastic book. I really, really like this book, and I'm really glad to have Andy Warner here in studio. Everybody loved this book, right? Yeah. Oh, that's some good noise. I like that. Good energy, good noise. All right. Question number one is it's always the same fucking question. I ask the same question to everybody. Why comics? You could do anything you want creatively. What is it about comics that excites you, energizes you, thrills you, makes you sit there for 8 hours a day drawing? Right?
Yeah. Well, so my mom found a autobiography that I'd written in first grade.
Wow.
In the attic a few years ago. And in it, I explain my life thus far. And I talk about how I'm either going to become a cartoonist or a mime. So I really think I actually made the right choice.
I do too.
Yeah,
I do too.
there's
Wow.
more money in comics than mimery.
Yeah.
So no, it's always been there for me. My mom raised us speaking French, and she taught us French with French comics, with Tintin and Asterix, and so for half an hour before school every day, we would read them. Growing up, my dad really
specifically
loved
comics to teach you language. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually think that that's a really great way to teach language because you have the action right there with the words, and so if the kid already knows how to read, you're reinforcing the vocabulary.
Yep.
And she is a French teacher professionally, or she was. She's retired now. But and then my dad, loved newspaper comics, and so we grew up with Calvin and Hobbes, and Berkeley Breathed, and Dilbert, and Foxtrot, and all these books.
Far Side, probably.
Yeah.
Too.
Oh, so much Far Side, especially with the biologist stuff. Oh my God! Every scientist you ever meet has Far Side cartoons.
It's hella true.
Yeah,
it's hella true.
It totally is. And so we were always, I was raised in this environment that was, even though my dad's a scientist and my mom's a teacher, there was a lot of love of comics in our household. And so when I started drawing them at a very early age, they actually encouraged it.
Yeah.
And even though I kind of pushed myself away from it in high school, because there's that
girls and cars.
No, it wasn't even that actually. It was it was believing that the arts wasn't a viable life. Because I think that's a common narrative for a kid that is doing well in school. It's going to academia, do whatever, and it took a few years, and eventually I realized that it was the one thing that I could do a lot of stuff, but it was the one thing that was really fascinating to me on a consistent basis every day.
You talk in a couple places in the book about Trinidad and like
Yeah,
sort
my
of
mom grew
growing
up in
up
Trinidad. Yeah, I
internationally, I
grew up in
suppose.
Trinidad. Yeah.
Where were you when you were in kind of junior high school years?
So by the time I was in school, for the most part, we were back in the States 9 months out of the year, and then we would be gone in the summers at my dad's research stations, either in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands or in Corsica in the Mediterranean. And so it would be in Santa Barbara, where he's a professor, 9 months out of the year, and then gone for 3 months.
Interesting that your experience was that arts are not a viable career, especially in Santa Barbara. You would think that.
Yeah. Well, also too, like my mom worked as a scientific illustrator for a little while, like before I was born, when they were living in Panama. But I don't know. My grandma was a sculptor. Like it shouldn't have been a thing that I like convinced myself of.
Right.
But I don't know. Academics were also really interesting to me, and I thought I was going to do that. So I really threw myself into that, and then comics became more interesting.
So let's talk maybe about that moment where you switched back to comics. What was it that convinced you that comics were the thing the second time, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, part of it is what that book is about, actually. It happened while I was in Beirut in 2005. It had been building a little bit before that. I had started drawing them again in early college. And I was in the arts dorm at Cornell in this environment of people that were experimenting with the arts. And it was sort of an interesting place to be. And I wondered if I wanted to start drawing more. And so I bought pens, got paper. I think an ex-girlfriend gave me some pens. And I just started doing it. And then I had this experience when I was in Lebanon in 2005, and I was really isolated for the first time in my life. I was living alone for the first time. I was a foreigner in a country that was experiencing a profound political crisis. And so the society itself was sort of discombobulated. And I found refuge, I guess, or found mania, something, in artistic output. And so I was just drawing constantly. And it was enthralling. It was exciting. And that feeling is something that I think has always stayed with me since then. And it's something that I remember as a child, too, is, making narratives and stuff like that.
Sure.
Exciting.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is what was it that made comics the way to do it rather than just diary or journaling or something like that? Right? It seems hyper specific.
Well, diaries and journaling, which I also sometimes engage in, although not all the time, are a very private form, and I think comics are a form of storytelling. And I've always liked storytelling. I played D&D as a kid, and then I went on to play other role-playing games. I made video games when I was a kid. I got into these communities where we were making our own graphics and creating our own custom games and stuff like that. So I think this urge to make public stories has always been with me. And comics was the language that I learned early on to do it, and then just sharpened until it worked.
Nice. Let's maybe pivot to the presentation.
Sure.
You have a presentation of where the book came from, and then might make it easier to ask some of the questions.
Yeah.
Jordan, we cool with that? Yeah. All right. Very good.
Awesome. So this is just going to be a maybe 10-minute thing about the background of the book, my history with the country, with Lebanon and Beirut, and then the actual process that went into making a memoir comic about a manic break. So next slide. So before this, before I wrote this book, I was mainly known for Still nonfiction. Nonfiction comics are what I do, and what I sort of figured out I was good at doing. We can talk about that later. But my first book, Brief Histories of Everyday Objects, was Object Histories, all told very humorously about the most boring things I could think of. This Land is My Land was stories I could tell about utopias and human ambition and things like that. And so writing a really dark memoir about revolution and mental illness and occasional drug use was kind of a big pivot. So I kind of want to explain how I got there. So next slide. So in 2005, I went to Beirut for the first time as a study abroad student to study Lebanese literature. I was an undergrad at the time, and it was a decision that not an enormous amount of thought had actually gone into. I was kind of deciding between Cairo and Beirut, and I ended up going to Beirut. And that decision changed my life. Next slide. So being abroad at that time as an American then was an interesting experience because it was so much in the immediate wake of the Iraq War. It was 2005. The Iraq War had only happened in 2003. And this is an event that I think as Americans we still don't really have the full ability to wrap our heads around the profound effect that it had on the region. Rippling out from everything into ISIS to destabilization in Egypt, wherever. I mean, it is this generational event. And so it was the early days of that. And I think being abroad as an American in the Middle East is always an interesting thing because the history of our nation and of that region are so profoundly and deeply intertwined because of our politics and the political choices that we've made and we've been party to and that have been made in our name. Next slide. So I was studying abroad at the American University of Beirut there, and within about, I think it was 2 weeks or so of being there, an enormous car bomb went off that basically leveled an entire city block, killing the former prime minister of Lebanon, Rafik Hariri, who was this kind of really interesting figure in Lebanese politics because he was an oligarch. He had, in this post-conflict zone, come into the country with an enormous amount of money that he'd made in Saudi Arabia doing construction, and controlled the political process and the economic and political recovery, basically, from this terrible 15-year civil war, and profited personally immensely from it, while also rebuilding the city and the country. And so he's this very polarizing figure that a lot of people have a lot of opinions about, and was killed in the street 2 weeks after I get there. Next slide. So immediately everybody blamed it on the Syrians because for complicated political reasons that we could either get into here or you could read the book. I try to give at least a little bit of sense to it. And basically what resulted was this early harbinger of political sentiment that would eventually become the Arab Spring, and then later, even, and I'll talk about this at the end of the slideshow, the political uprisings this year of this sort of sentiment of revolution in the streets of the Arab world, of this younger generation that were connected by social media, at the time text messages, and it was enormous. At one point, a quarter of the country was out in the streets protesting the Syrian presence in the country. The Syrian army had occupied the country and controlled the political process there, lock, stock, and barrel, since the end of the Civil War in the 1990s. Next slide. And it worked. The Syrians withdrew. But at the same time as this was all going on, this sort of profound, enormous political event in this country that I was a stranger in, I was also beginning to experience the contours of what built to be the biggest mental health crisis of my life. And this started out small, but in rereading my diary in very easily identifiable ways as these instances of paranoia grew,
Right.
and just these really weird warning signs that sort of grew and grew until, next slide, things sort of began to spiral out for me personally as I became involved with more and more drugs, and sort of generally questionable decisions until finally, next slide, I experienced a near suicide attempt. I don't really know entirely how to categorize it in retrospect,
Right.
but it's something that's haunted me since then. And this book is kind of an attempt to create a reckoning with that and also with the country that it happened in. Next slide. Because it is a country that I kept this bond with. So things calmed down in my life and in the political landscape of Lebanon in the immediate term. Next slide. There continue to be periodic assassinations, political assassinations throughout the next few months, and in fact the next few years. My inner turmoil kind of like leveled off a little bit, and I left. Next slide. But I came back, and that is, I think, one of the decisions that led to this book, and in fact led to my professional life as a whole, because a lot of my early comics actually revolve around Lebanon and the Arab world, and the connections that I nurtured while I was there. The first comics that were ever published by me were published by a Lebanese comics collective called Samandal, who are in this slide. And so sort of from the development point of an artist, it was very important for me to go back to that place, but also so I went back in 2011, and then that was, next slide, the sort of beginning of, that was the summer of when the Arab Spring started to basically turn. So the Arab Spring had begun the previous December when a fruit seller in Tunisia set himself on fire to protest being crushed under the weight of this all-seeing totalitarian regime that had controlled his country since he was born. And then it spread across the region very rapidly in this way that a continent away, I was back in at grad school at the time that winter, reminded me so much of Lebanon in 2005. The people in the streets, the rhythm of even some of the chants that were being used was the same. And I tried at that time so at that time in 2011, that summer, it was when sort of the Syrian war was starting to begin to turn dark. It was beginning to turn from the Syrian uprising to the Syrian civil war. And so that was the first time that I tried to make this experience into a comic. And I created this comic, next slide. Oh, sorry, before I get to that, next slide. I became involved with this Beirut comics collective called Samandal, who are amazing, fantastic. You should look up their work. They became famous early on for publishing trilingually in French, English, and Arabic, and you have to flip the books as you read them. They were the first place that ever published me in 2007, I think it was. Next slide. Very early on in my career, I did the cover of their second issue, that purple one up on the top left. And so they were the people that, when I went back there in 2011, it sort of changed this city from being this place of like darkness in my youth to this place of like this artistic milieu that I was in and becoming a part of and getting excited about. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. So what came out of that was this mini comic, The Man Who Built Beirut. And in that mini comic, I basically tried to retell the story of the political aspect of what happened in 2005, and tell the story tracing the politics of this uprising in Lebanon in 2005 through to the Arab Spring, as I was writing it, where it was that fall of 2011, as the Syrian civil war was just opening into the gates of hell. That book then became sort of the foundation, next slide, of my professional career, because from that I then spent the next half-decade working as a comics journalist, and one of the things that basically allowed me to get or work early on was the specialty knowledge that I had of Middle Eastern politics. But in writing that story, I left out the entirety of the personal crisis aspect of it. It was just about the politics, because it's a scary story to tell.
Absolutely.
Next slide. So then I was like, I'm going to try to tell it again. So I used to edit this indie comics anthology called Irene that, in retrospect, actually we can talk about this, like published an insane amount of people, like Ben Passmore, Casey Nowak, like all these amazing folks, Tilly Walden. But, you know, at the time, nobody read us. Like, we were nothing, but it was really fun to do. And so in the last issue of it, it was always a place that I used as a place I could experiment. And in the last issue of it, I tried to do this story about this trip I took to Syria in the last few months before I left Lebanon and went to Aleppo, the city that I then watched sort of destroyed on television, you know, on YouTube and on live radio in the following years. And trying to process that and what it means to experience that as an outsider, and as an outsider writing about it. And, next slide. And so from that story was called An Unraveling. And so that I kind of tried to deal with the feelings aspect of it a little more, but I still, next slide, didn't actually deal with like the personal trauma and mental illness aspect, because it's hard to tell. It's hard to talk about that stuff. Next slide. And so, 3 times, having tried to tell the story apparently is the charm, because after writing Brief Histories of Everyday Objects, this weird freewheeling book about object history, sort of for a YA audience, I decided that the obvious book to pitch as a follow-up to my publishers was a dark, brooding memoir about the unraveling of the Middle East. But they bought it, so there you go. So swing for the fences, I guess, is one lesson. But it was this amazing opportunity, and I figured that if I told these people about this story and they told me that they wanted to have me tell it, that I should not think twice about it and go for it. And it was hard. It involved revisiting an older self of mine that I had difficulty identifying with, and experiences that were very traumatic. And it also involved plowing through a lot of writing of a 20-year-old that is just really, I mean, like, can you imagine yourself keeping a diary as a 21? Like, you come off like an asshole. Like, it's just, it's the worst. So that was probably the worst part of it, was just being like, oh, you fucking idiot, like, over and over again. And so, but I was keeping actually 2 different diaries at the time. I was keeping a physical diary, and I was keeping an outward-facing blog, which I don't talk about in the book, to tell my parents that I was doing okay. And friends back home, it was the era of Blogspot, I think. And
that was an era.
but in the diary, the physical diary, when I started to lose it, I stopped writing dates. And my handwriting kind of goes out the window. And so I had to print out my, and I also had letters from, that photocopied letters of things that I'd sent, comics that I'd written at the time. So this is all original source material of stuff that I have from there. So next slide. So basically, I started making these giant spreadsheets. So this is one day that I've mapped out with all these different sources, because the only way that I could triangulate what was happening in my physical diary was using my blogger thing that would be talking about the political situation.
So the columns are the different
So
sources.
this is so
your own sources, but they're different sources.
So on the far left is the day of the week. Then second from left is the date. Third from left is my summary from the 2 diary entries and what they jog in my memory.
Okay.
And what I see is salient to the plot.
Right.
So that's me taking notes on it. Then the next one is the physical diary, and then the one after that is the blogger, Blogspot one, and then the one after that I think is I had like a little tape recorder that I briefly used.
Wow.
No, that was awful.
Wow.
Yeah, never record yourself. But it gave me a lot of material that I had to plow through. And so that was how I pieced this book back together, because I was a pretty unreliable narrator. And I try to talk to that in the book. The difficulty of trying to write any memoir, I think, is always pretty subjective. And, but especially memoir about a point in your life when you're maybe not writing things that are to be trusted. But anyway, so next slide. Also, I had to go through a bunch of old family photos, which that was actually fun. So this is us growing up in Panama, digging through all the different weird places that I spent my childhood. Roll next slide. And then, so I took all those things, all those spreadsheets, et cetera, and I wrote this annotated script that Luke remembers for these probably. I brought in a couple of these to my classes whenever I teach, to show my students the way that I write with scripts, because I will write the script out. So I write scripts first, and then I go through with a highlighter, and one highlighter says cut and the other says reword.
Okay.
And then I do that, then I do a thumbnail draft, then it's off to the races. So slide. And then I draw it, and I actually end this book as I'm writing it. So I visited the country last in 2017, and the book ends with that visit. And by that point, I had gotten the book contract, and I was in the thick of writing it, and kind of had the privilege to go back there and deal with this echo one more time. Slide. And that's how I made this crazy book. But I would like to say one more thing before I end the slideshow while I have you. And that is that right now, to a lesser degree this week, but over the past few months, revolution is once again in the streets of Beirut. And I think that that's a really important thing that I want to use this platform to speak to. Especially, slide, friends of mine, artists who are Lebanese and who are drawing their own revolution as they see it from their own perspective in the streets of their own city. So this is Lina Khaibe, a fantastic cartoonist doing a comic about taking your kids to protest. Slide. This is Yazan Al-Sadi and Omar Khouri, also fantastic cartoonist. Sadi is a writer, and Omar Khouri is the artist on this one, but he also writes as well, and he comes out of Samandal, that publishing collective. And I actually edited this comic at the Nib. This appeared for the 100th day anniversary of the Lebanese protests, which passed, I think, in late January. So I'm doing whatever I can to support them. They grind it out in the face of...
Send us, if you can, URLs, because we can run them
that would be great.
When we put it up publicly, and get this a little wider.
Fantastic.
So,
all right. Now I'll just turn it over to... I think the last slide on this is just the book cover again. Is it?
Is it? It's empty. Great.
Empty. There you go.
Yay! Right, okay. That's a lot to unpack. Where do I want to start with all of that? Because there's really a lot in there, and all of it's really important. It's scary to to present yourself in a raw way and to present dealing with how you are with different cultures and dealing with suicidal thoughts and things like that. It's the thing that I admire about this and that I admire about comics generally is that you're able to comics, the best journalistic comics tell us about a place and a time and a person and a thing that we couldn't get in any other way, right? Because we're mixing those words and those pictures. And I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit? That was a terrible fucking question. I'm sorry. Just because that was a really intense.
No, it's cool.
Yeah,
it's cool.
yeah.
I do think actually that. So I mean, just speaking to comics journalism, because that's a world that I come out of, and this is. Like I think that the influence of Sacco is very clear in this. Like he blurred my book, which was one of the most important experiences of my life, because he reading Palestine when I was in high school, changed me profoundly. And I think that you can accomplish storytelling in any medium, right?
Sure.
And you can accomplish journalism in any medium. But one thing that you get asked a lot as a comics journalism is why do comics, right? Because there's radio journalism, there's print journalism, why pick this form? And I do think that one of the things that comics has going for it always is this immediate experience.
Yes.
That when you squint at a page of text, it becomes a big gray block. This visual aspect can draw you into it. It can be an emotional experience, I think, for that reason. And depending on how the author guides it, with page turns and setups and stuff like that. But I think some of the best comics journalism, like Sacco, deals with that, and he is able to do that in his book-length works. And I've never actually had the opportunity to do book-length comics journalism. My comics journalism has always been shorter stuff for the nib, longer stuff. But this is not a work of journalism. It's a memoir with names changed, actually. So it's pretty far from it. But I tried to, I guess, use the tools and techniques that I kind of grew up absorbing from that world in this.
When you pitch a book like this, was there any resistance from the publisher, or because it is kind of all over the place in a lot of ways, right?
Totally.
There's a lot of journalism going on here in many ways. There's a lot of, but there's also a lot of memoir and a lot of really it's multiple different. The strength of the book, I think, is that it's all these different things. But,
no, they were really down with it, which is awesome. Okay. One thing is that my editor at formerly Picador, now St. Martin's Griffin, who put this book out, Anna DeVries, has always just been a really big champion of mine. Right. Brief Histories, my first book, comes from her just walking down to Forbidden in New York, looking for mini comics and finding the mini comic version of that, bringing it back to the office and being like, we're going to make this into a book, I'm going to call this guy up. Out of the blue.
That's pretty cool.
And I've put out books with other editors at other places and stuff like that, but she, found me. Yeah. And I trust her. Yeah. She's a really neat person, and so I sent it to my agent first before reaching out to them. Farley Chase, who has been with me again since that first book, and this is my third book with him. And he has always had a really good, feeling for this stuff. And I was like, I have this story that I've just had haunting me for years now, and I just really want to do it. And I think about it constantly. I think about it going for walks. Right. I want to tell the story, and they asked for a follow-up book, and I feel like if I don't pitch this story now, I'll regret it. Yeah. And so he said, tell me about it. And I wrote him this big long email, and he said, pass it on to them. And they were into it from the get-go. I mean, I think that, you know, I'm an editor of comics journalism, and and I've worked in comics journalism for a long time, so I know how to make a pitch. So I was like, you know, it's a book about the lead up to the Arab Spring. It's about queer communities in the Arab world. It's about mental health. It's about outsiderness. It's, you know, there's a lot there.
It's about a lot of things.
But you know, I came to them with possible hooks.
No, absolutely. Do you think that maybe doing a brief history of ordinary objects was a way to not deal with some of the themes? Do you know what I mean? Because in a way, brief history is banal. In a way, I'm not. That's not a criticism in any way, shape, or form.
No, it's like intentionally so. No, it's literally about the most boring things I could think of.
Right.
No, I don't think so, and here's why. Because brief histories comes from, I had just graduated comic school, and I was doing some freelance work, and I was like, I need to come up with a great idea to just sell a bunch of comics.
Yeah.
And I was in the shower, and I was like, you know what was awesome from when you were a kid was like Larry Gonick comics. And like this nonfiction thing that kids were talking about that you were good at in grad school, like mix those up. And, you know, my editor, Matt Bors, once described my beat as stoned on Wikipedia. And so I just kind of like fused those things together. And I like thought to myself, what is a book that like somebody old, somebody young, like you can give them this book and be like, it's a book about toothbrushes. Okay, I'll read it. And so that was very intentional on my part. So I don't think it was a dodge. It was like, what can I make that will sell books?
Okay, so it was a commercial decision then.
Yeah, totally. But like a lot of my life is like, I don't think that I got into comics to like make a living as a cartoonist and be a professional cartoonist. And so I've done a lot of weird freelance work in my life. Like I've worked for like, you know, like software, like antivirus companies, like doing comics for them. Like I've been a freelance cartoonist for like 15 years. So, you know, you're always trying to think of good hustles. And that was a good hustle that I thought of, and then it became a really fun book to work on. And then, you know, so, but this, at the same time as I was doing all that stuff, because commercial work has always been a part of my life, and so is humor, doing humor work. I was also editing Irene that whole time and doing a lot of serious stories in Irene, and I did this trilogy that I later collected as a mini comic called When We Were Kids that I think I probably sold with you consignment that actually tells a couple stories that reappear in this book as like fake, even more fake versions, like through completely fictionalized characters. So I was working out stuff in those stories too. And doing public work dealing with trauma, it just wasn't attaching my actual name to it.
There's we're talking about commerciality. 15 years ago, there was certainly a lot less commerciality than there is today, right? Like the market has actually changed. That
it rules.
That this is viable now. It's truly viable to do something like this. Let's talk a little about sort of those early days and getting to the point of viability. I mean, how did you? That hustle, man. That hustle of going around and trying to sell your books in individual stores, right? That's a weird fucking thing, ain't it?
How much money did I make from like selling my books here? Probably like, I don't know, at the most like $100 or two, like over the course of a few years, and that's like spread out over. But on the other hand, selling those mini comics, like one of those mini comics in one store, like got me brief histories. Like another one that was published online is where This Land Is My Land came from. This book came out of The Man Who Built Beirut, which started off as a mini comic. So, you know, like there's a lot of years of the hustle, but there's not a lot of years of wasted work.
Sure.
And I don't think, especially if you're trying to have a career in the arts, there's almost no such thing as wasted work, because you're just like always moving forward and learning from what doesn't work, what does work, trying to figure out what you want, what people want from you.
Yeah. When you did that initial hustle, obviously
I'm still doing that.
And yes, sorry.
You never stop.
No, you never stop. You never
eventually.
stop. But I wonder about those early days when you're. I mean, obviously, there's comic shops in the Bay Area that are quality comic shops, and we all know which ones are the good ones.
Yeah.
Did you go into the? I don't want to say not good ones, because everybody who puts their time and energy into this is good. But like the ones who are more superhero focused.
Yeah, not that much. I mean, I would go to the ones that were more indie friendly locally, wherever I was.
Sure.
And then you buy through Tony Shenton? Is he
Sure.
still around? Yeah.
He is, but
Tony,
it's not an easy.
Yeah.
From my side of things, it's not an easy thing to deal with 1,000 different suppliers, right?
Totally,
you know,
totally.
It's different when you walk in the door and like, I've got this great comic, and like, oh, I can actually see, this is a fucking great comic. Yeah, let's do it. You know,
but then also, like, I worked for many, many years really hard on the convention circuit,
Yeah.
and still, I mean, I took like 3 years off to, have twins with my wife.
Sure.
And travel less. But I'm going to more conventions this year.
Yeah.
And did last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I used to go to like half a dozen to a dozen every year.
Right.
And that's fun. I mean, that's like an amazing aspect of the industry.
Yeah, of course.
This whole
I
traveling.
I guess one of the reasons I'm asking this question though is because hopefully this interview will last for all time. It'll be up on the internet. People will look at it, and so how do you balance your time?
Yeah.
As a person who's trying to make things and then produce them and then get them out to stores, probably 80% of which are hostile, or maybe not hostile, maybe not hostile, but, or even into independent bookstores and things like that. I mean, like, what's your advice there for a creator who's looking at this in the future? Like, how do I do that hustle and yet still do my work?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, I think that, so consignment's never going to be the main pillar of anybody's thing. I think consignment can be a good way to like keep your name in your local community, basically. I do think conventions actually are important.
Okay.
And I think that if you do conventions and you figure them out, you can make it not a money-losing venture too. You can even make money on them.
Sure.
And then they're this way to travel all around the country and stay excited about the forum and see all your friends and experiment, see like what people are buying at conventions of your mini comics.
But
like I would put out a mini comic or two every year.
Yeah.
For like.
But you're not talking about conventions. You're not talking about a Wizard
indie
World,
cons.
right?
No,
Indies,
no.
right?
Like SPX.
And so again, we're looking mostly at kind of New York, San Francisco,
I mean,
Toronto,
there's more and more like
places
Austin,
but
Columbus.
overall, places that are expensive to travel to, expensive to table at.
Yeah.
I kind of want to tease this part.
Well, if
really
you want to start,
industry,
So I mean, my very first time at a convention was I made this comic called Spring-Heeled Jack about this mythical figure called Spring-Heeled Jack, and I like folded it. It was like a 8.5 folded piece of paper. Printed out like 100 copies of them, and I took them to Ape because Ape still existed, and I just gave them out for free. And you can still do that at a lot of zine shows around, like anywhere that you are. There's probably a zine show at least a few towns over, I think, and so that's probably the best place to start. And zine shows really are welcoming to the indie comics community too.
Sure.
And then once you figured out your shit at a zine show, then you know how much you can sell, and then you can maybe justify the upfront cost of like a plane ticket and a table, or gas and a table at a closer show, and just work your way up. Like it was, I went to one show at first and a couple shows, and then I figured it out, and then I could like make back a plane ticket, table, printing, and a profit, and then I was going to like a dozen shows a year. But it took me like 3 years to figure that out and get there first.
it's I mean, it seems like
But
it's
it's
harder
not-
for
yeah,
some
it's not
kids
easy,
in
yeah.
Kansas or something, you know?
Yeah, totally,
Right, because
yeah,
they don't necessarily have the local situation.
No,
to help
absolutely.
them
And
make
now,
that work,
even now,
yeah.
like Abe doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's always new
Right,
shows too.
yeah.
I guess figuring out your local community is
Yeah.
always important. But there are
How important do you think comics education is? Like school?
increasingly so. I mean, speaking of Kansas, like
Yeah.
I know Emmy Gannis was teaching comics in Kansas for at least a little while. I don't know if she still is. But comics have really undergone like a entry into academia in the last decade and a half, kind of starting
Absolutely.
out maybe with my grad school, the Center for
Yep.
Cartoon Studies, but then spreading all across the country. There's MFA programs
Sure.
here.
Sure.
There's CCA.
Nick Suzanis' program at State.
Yep.
Yep.
But then there's also comics classes all over the place.
Sure.
I teach at Stanford. I teach at the comics, the animation workshop in Denmark.
Yeah.
I'm going there next week for that. And that's done two things. I mean, one is that it's actually provided, I think, a similar thing to what it provided to writers, that is for a lot of cartoonists, like faculty positions at places that is
True.
interesting.
Absolutely.
I don't do that, actually. I teach just part-time. I teach like every other year, basically. I mainly do books and journalism work, but it provides that avenue. And then also, I think whenever anything enters into the academy, like a critical language develops around it.
Very much so. Very much
People
so.
are exposed to it more. How styles can develop, but I don't know. I think it's an exciting thing.
There are times that I wonder if we're not selling people a bill of goods, because it's clearly not that, right? But when I think about the number of professional comics programs in the country, and there's 20 to 30 minimum people being graduated from like expensive fucking programs, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I wonder how many of these people can actually make a living from comics, right?
I think that's always a
not just
great
the
question.
hack it part, but like there's not as many opportunities as the people wanting to make money off, money, right?
I mean,
I'm sorry, that's the wrong
I
way to
mean
put it.
also
Yeah.
in the sense of like you might be the best cartoonist in the world, but if you have to like work two jobs to pay to make your own dream book because you can't get a big enough advance from the indie publisher, then like maybe you're not going to draw comics for very long.
Yeah. I mean, even your own book. I mean, I don't know if it was this one. Yeah, I live in a garret room.
No, I work in a garret room. I work in a garret room.
No, but still,
I'm
right?
fine,
Like it's
I'm
just,
fine,
there's I almost feel sometimes that comics are for the young.
Yeah, I don't know actually, because like one thing that actually going to the Center for Cartoon Studies and having this academic class of cartoonists still around and exposed to younger people that I think is great is that it exposes cartoonists to people like Jason Lutz or Linda Barry, or like anybody teaching at the CCA program here, like Matt Slater, like all these people that like have normal lives and they're like older professionals and they're also great cartoonists.
And comics will break your heart.
Well, sure, but everything will
break your heart.
Yeah, I mean, being an accountant will break your heart too.
I guess.
Like it can be a really hard and punishing life, like any life in the arts can be. I would say nonfiction actually is like a little bit of a different world, and that's true in like fiction, nonfiction, both in prose and comics for some reason. Like there's a lot more paying gigs in nonfiction than there are in fiction, and so my experience of being a professional in comics is very different from somebody that is like mainly writing fiction whose work is getting published by like Koyama and like all these like amazing smaller indie presses. It's just like a different, like in a similar way that like nonfiction essayists, like it's easier to get a job like writing journalism and writing essays than writing, short fiction stories. The same is true.
Comics are incredibly labor intensive though,
Oh my God, yes.
How I mean, roughly how long would you say? Now, obviously there's a lot of thought, right? But the actual execution, the physical drawing, the doing the work, what would you say that what do we got? 196 pages, 197.
That guy probably, I think, took me about 2 years.
Okay.
At the same time, I was working as the managing editor, as contributing editor for the Nib, and putting out their issues and doing a bunch of writing stuff on the time and stuff like that. So I think if I was only working on that, it probably would have taken me maybe a year and a quarter to a year and a half.
Okay.
Working 8-hour days.
So is that a little more than a page a day? No.
I don't know. You'd have to do the math.
200 pages, 365 days. So you're doing 2 pages a day.
It waxes and wanes too, because my teaching schedule is very
Sure, of
periodical. I'll teach 2 quarters at Stanford, and then not teach except for a 2-week course in Denmark for a year, and then teach 2 quarters at Stanford again. So I have like an on year where I do a book, and then an off year where I teach more intensely, and then an on year and an off year.
I don't understand how you do that. Wow.
It's cool. I didn't actually choose it. It's just because the class happens every other year.
Right, sure.
But it's an amazing schedule because I can maintain this teaching life that's still, even when I'm teaching, it's only about a third of my time. I'm still working, doing nib work and book work, but it sort of becomes a larger part of my life. And then, this year is my off year.
A paid gig? Is that?
Yeah. I used to be more of a paid gig because they were defunded.
Right.
But they are still putting out comics, and I'm still getting paid to edit comics there and getting paid to produce comics with them. They're just publishing it more limited than they used to. But the new issue, Animals, just came out, and I have a new comic in that about my childhood animals, and I edited a bunch of other ones. And it has a cover by Lisa Hannawalt, and it rules.
Yeah. It's... I kind of don't understand how the math works on it as a print object, right? Am I wrong? Like it's not. Actually, its distribution is kind of mostly Diamond and some other.
No. Its distribution is mostly like membership based.
Oh,
okay. It comes out of. There was a big Kickstarter a few years ago that then got rolled over into this membership program.
Okay.
And like the main perk of the membership program is basically
is the print object.
Yeah. So it's kind of a. It's a similar model to Patreon or
so
Kickstarter.
Distribution is a secondary concern then from that model. Is that a fair thing to say?
So I, as a contributing editor, I actually don't know
look
a
at the math.
ton
that's all good.
behind the curtain, but it's mainly the print is actually super important to their model because it's what keeps the members contributing to, because the online content is free.
Sure.
So it's one of the ways that money flows into it.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. I mean, this thing is kind of similar, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's nobody really knows how to do.
Yeah, the online. You can't make any money off online, right? It's got to be the physical object at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know how comfortable you're talking about some of this stuff, but I do wonder, to do a 200-page book like this, like what kind of an advance are you getting? Can you survive off that alone?
Yeah. So you get half on signing and half on completion.
Right.
So you need to have the financial ability to basically work on spec for half the time that you're budgeting.
Yep.
So that's difficult. I mean, my wife works. I have a bunch of freelance work. It's fine. And so I think
Thank you
that's
for your work, by the way.
No, totally. Thank you also for your healthcare. Absolutely.
There's no healthcare.
I get book advances. I work as a contractor when I'm a teacher, and a contractor for the Nib. I have no healthcare personally. I get it through my wife.
I mean, these are things I legit
and that's
worry
a very
about.
serious cost that
all
I have to
of
bear.
the time. I worry about this. About that again. We're bringing in 30, 40, 50 people a year, like going, you're going to have a career in comics. And like, what is that career though?
Yeah.
That career is an advance that may or may not pay your time.
The advance, I think, pays my time. It doesn't pay my time as much as just doing freelance would for that time, if it was like an hour by hour thing.
Right.
But books get you flown to foreign countries and like reviews and stuff. So you do them.
Sure.
So there's like a certain professional calculation that you make.
Yeah.
That's why I never am only doing books or only doing freelance. I'm
Yeah.
always doing kind of a mixture to
Yeah.
make a little more money from the freelance side, make a little less money from the book side.
Right,
But
right.
the book advance was significant enough that it was, yeah, I could have done it. But the hard thing is that division. So
Yeah.
that's where having a partner
you-
with a steadier income.
Do you think that you need to have multiple skills other than just being a goddamn good cartoonist,
Thank you.
right?
Yeah.
To make it as a cartoonist, right? Like,
Yeah.
you also have to have a math brain somewhere in there, right?
My math
And
brain is
a
really
business
bad.
brain or something,
Business
right?
brain, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to be really nice too. I think that really helps. And I say that as an editor too, as somebody that is paid to also deal with cartoonists.
Right.
But I think that what got me my professional career in the early days, I was working as a freelancer for like Slate and things like that, doing comics journalism about the early days of the Arab uprisings
Yeah.
in 2011.
Yeah.
People kept giving me more work because I turned in my work on time and
Yeah.
I was nice and easy to correspond with.
Yeah, yeah,
and they
yeah.
would like tell me this.
Sure.
And so this is one of the things that I try to impress upon my students over and over again. It's such a simple thing, but honestly, the competition, a lot of people aren't. Like a lot of people are assholes. And
I
they
am.
don't turn in their work on time.
Oh, I am. Seriously. I am.
And so if you do those two things, like
Yeah.
you might get a call back, and then a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is privilege, but it's
How much of it is
that-
relationships, though?
Well, a ton of it is that. I mean, I went to grad school, and that got me relationships
Yeah.
for sure, and that was part of the reason why I did. So I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies
Yeah.
to become a better cartoonist,
Yeah.
but it also, gave me this professional network that I still lean on to this
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. So you would say then that the cartoon education is legit important.
For me,
Yeah.
not for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that that's everybody's choice to make. I
Sure.
think that there's, there was like a weird discussion a while back where old timers were kind of getting grumpy about like the new comic schools and being like, I came up through the school of hard knocks, you
Right.
can't teach
Sure.
comics, you're just
Sure.
ripping people off. And fair enough, but like if people want to give it that shot, like that was actually probably the best professional decision of my life.
Yeah,
I was working as a graphic designer. It was 2 years into the Great Recession.
Yeah.
My professional career was going nowhere,
Right.
and I went to comic school and became a much better cartoonist,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also figured out that I was good at nonfiction, which then
Yeah.
shaped me
Yeah.
profoundly.
Here's a really stupid question.
Yeah.
Did at any point you ever think about mainstream comics work?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought so. I went to grad school.
I could see your Spider-Man pitch.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
could actually
totally,
kind of see it in my head,
I went to grad school thinking I was going to do horror comics. I
okay.
really liked horror manga,
Yeah.
which you can kind of see some
Yeah,
of them
yeah,
there.
yeah.
And I loved Steve Bissett. So
Right.
like he's a teacher there, so I
Yep.
was like super pumped about that. And I still love monsters, but I just realized I was way better at sort of pop sci explanations of
Yeah.
political violence in the Middle East than about like.
I love that actually.
Yeah.
I love that. What's your general view of the future of comics? Boy, that's a really fucking broad question, ain't it?
I mean, I'm optimistic as much as I'm optimistic about anything. I think that publishing in general is in a very weird place as new media, as sort of like the money tide recedes from new media,
Right.
which has to do with the NIB getting defunded. Like there's a
Yeah.
few other places, and I think we'll probably start to see that in publishing and the comics publishing too. But also, it's an incredibly exciting place to be. Like people that I came up with, I'm 36 years old. People that I came up with that I was publishing in Irene when we were all kids are like winning all the cool awards.
Sure.
And like the NIB is kicking ass, and comics journalism is at this amazing golden place that I couldn't even have imagined it would
Yeah.
be when I first started really doing it in 2011, 2012, and I was every convention that I went to had a panel that was like, "What is comics journalism?" And I was like, "Okay, the same talk for the eighth time."
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm optimistic, but the world might light on fire and burn and turn to ash.
Well,
anytime, though, so.
There's that. I'm trying to.
Also, one thing that's really cool about comics, actually, that I want to talk to just
please,
from the perspective of an educator, because I see a lot of the young people that are coming up making comics, is that the people that are coming up in my classes right now are queerer, they're browner, there's more women making comics than there were even when I was coming up not that long ago when I thought it was a pretty diverse scene. And that's a really exciting thing to me. And so I think that
because it's an art form that's actually accessible to people. You don't have to have money to make comics, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
And you just need a pen and a paper. It's all you need.
It always has been. You're getting this world now that like grew up on like these amazing webcomics and on Tumblr and like on all these platforms where they're sharing all this stuff, and now they're like making all these cool things that are shredding right now and will only continue to shred more.
Sure. I just, again, when you talk about Tumblr and things like that, I always worry about how do you make money off this as a creative person?
But that's always been the worry, right? That's how I convinced myself to stop in high school, right?
Right.
And then had I listened to that voice, I never would have come back to it. So I don't know. And like one thing that people always want to ask when you're an artist who makes a living at it is like, how do you, like, what was the roadmap, right?
Right.
There's no maps.
There is
right? There's
of course.
Like every career, especially these days where like every gatekeeper is like lying shattered on the ground and like new media forms are like exploding and then getting defunded and like you don't even know what's going on. I don't know what the landscape's going to be like in 5 years, so why not give it a shot?
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a lot of new cartoonists are being funneled into the kids and YA space, which is exciting and good. That's not a bad thing.
The next book I'm doing is going to be YA. Sort of in the spirit of Brief Histories, actually. It's about like the commensalism and animal domestication, but human history with animals. Retelling the story of like dogs and pigeons and cats and rabbits and stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been so fun. It's been such a great break from this book too. It's been such a palate cleanser.
Yeah. Do you think we're gonna reach a point though where too many people are being funneled into?
Yeah, of course. There's always a bubble.
Narrow thing, right? Yeah. So as an educator, how do you teach that, or do you teach that, or you just?
No, I mean I think that opportunism is an important thing to teach. That like, a successful career is always a mix of, like I said, privilege and luck, and also knowing when the luck happens and jumping on it. Having this sense of opportunism, just being like, oh, seems like a really good market right now.
Right.
They want me to work in this market, and the advance is double the last advance I got.
Right.
That seems like something you should probably do.
Sure.
Make hay while the sun shines, and then eventually the bubble bursts, and then everybody starts throwing out their stuff. I don't know. Everybody was doing like Adventure Time promos for a while.
No,
like,
I know.
I just like again, cartoonists are mercenaries. That's one thing we have.
No, it's all true. I just I'm optimistic in all ways, and I'm also like, oh my God, are all these kids going like in a way, because most of the cartoonists that I order are in their 20s, right? And in your 20s, you're an idiot, right? Like you don't know what's going on.
James Sturm, who founded the school I went to, once said, I forget if it was to me or a classmate of mine, a career in the arts is a war of attrition. That seems fair. That's you just keep at it, and sometimes I mean, ever since CCS's program started, I've made a point of every year, like, trying to go there and sort of teach them the actual market thing. Here's what the direct market means. Here's how, you see these numbers, but look, most books don't sell Dave Pilkey numbers, right? They don't, right? True. Like, I'm just so afraid we're teaching people this narrative of like, oh, if you're like Raina, that you're not like Raina. It doesn't matter. No, nobody's like Raina.
Nobody's like Raina, right?
But that's okay too. Like,
it is okay.
The fiction market's like that too.
Sure.
And as long as nobody's I don't know. The one thing that's nice about comics too is that it's a pretty resilient art form, right?
Sure.
It's gone through enormous
Sure.
amounts of boom and bust cycles.
Sure.
The 90s,
Sure.
for example.
I've
Comic
lived
Code.
through them
yeah, you
all.
were there.
Yep,
I
yep.
was in that bathroom.
Yep,
I mean,
yep,
there's
yep,
drawings in
yep,
that
yep.
bathroom that predate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always think of that the picture we have up there with Seth and Joe Mad and
Yeah.
you sons of
Exactly.
bitches. You said there'd be money in comics.
Exactly.
There's
So
not. It's comic. You do it because you love it and because you believe in it and because you're passionate about it.
Yeah,
and it
sometimes-
makes sense to you. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's the way you know to tell a story.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about dealing with mental illness, dealing with queerness. These are not light topics to do. How do you approach that as a creator? How do you put yourself out there?
Lightly, I don't know.
Yeah.
With great trepidation.
Right.
I don't know. One of the things that's weird about this book is that it is in spaces that are kind of outside of my space.
Yeah.
So I'm a white person writing about the Arab world.
Right.
I'm pretty straight presenting, writing about queer communities. And I don't know. It's that's an uncomfortable place, but I showed the book to friends a lot and talked to people and was very open to their feedback and tried to step lightly, I guess. And also recognize the privilege afforded to me moving in those spaces and make it more than just another book about some white kids study abroad.
Sure. And so what was the reaction to people? And also like, not that I would ever think that people aren't being honest, but are people able to be honest?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think so. At least the friends have been honest to me about it that have told me that I've fucked up in other situations in comics in that context. And so I think so. And I hope that anybody that I was close with that thought I did fuck up would feel comfortable telling me that I did. But I don't know. You do, like I said, I had telling this story was important enough to me to do that. And I don't want to in any way cast myself as having taken a great chance to write a mass market book as a white guy writing about brown people, because I think that's like, a pretty classic move. I don't know, you just try your best.
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of scary to put yourself out there to talk about feeling suicidal, to talk about sexuality that's off of the mainstream or whatever the fuck that means, right? Like I don't know. I couldn't do it probably. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it took me a long time to get there.
Yeah.
It took me 2 different other attempts at writing that same story and hanging on to those diaries and thinking about this story constantly, pretty much ever since then and ever since it happened, which I think is also something that I think making the book was part of, is setting that down in a way. And it wasn't a pleasant process. A lot of those things actually came back. I'm now in counseling and on medications that I was not on before. I started that book probably in reaction to things being brought up.
Interesting.
Maybe not. I don't know. I also had kids and dealt with
kids
toddlers.
Kind of make all the difference. In the world.
So that can drive you nuts too.
Yeah, that's the one thing that changed
and I
how
also
I think
entered
about
my
things more than anything
mid-30s.
else. Yeah, sure.
But definitely it made me. It was a hard book. It was the hardest book that I've done in a way that was profoundly different from other books. And I think I knew that going into it, but I didn't realize how hard it would be, and it was harder than I thought it would be. But it's done now. And one thing that doing it I thought of as I did it, and I talk about this in the book, is that every time you think about a story, you're constantly reworking it in your memory and trying to figure it out and figure out what happened in it and what it meant to you.
Yeah.
And writing this story down in this book kind of makes that version of the story and ends that for me.
Yeah.
And
Does
I don't
the
actually
telling
think
of it
about it.
change the
I think
telling
so.
of it?
I don't think about it that much as I used to.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it did. So I guess it was worth it.
Yeah.
I felt like I had to do it.
Yeah. No, I see that. Do we have any questions from the room? 'Cause I can keep talking, but maybe. No. No. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Hey.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to turn this into a question, but I felt like I really got a lot and identified out of the story as just like queer person in a bunch of privilege in a time where like shit sucks and also all your friends are dealing with mental health crises. And it was just, even though it was like written in the 90s, it just felt so relevant to right now and just felt like so much more like so much of the same shit just still happening, you know, and if anything, it kind of gave me a little bit of a sense of hope of feeling like, oh cool, shit's always sucked.
Yeah.
You know, where everything kind of feels like apocalyptic and the world's burning and like, you know, like there's bombs in the books. There's bombing in the books that starts off as such a big deal in the beginning, and then it's just like it's a panel.
Mm-hmm.
You get used to it. I'm just curious. What do you think about having this story like happen like in your 20s at the time it did now, and then how would you be like? What would it be like if you were in your 20s like now and writing this book? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so for one thing, just the speaking to everything constantly being bad. I mean, I started listening to news all the time at one point in my life. I used to listen to like audiobooks and comedy podcasts and stuff like that. And as I listen to audio as I draw.
Yes.
And I think it was when I started working for the Nebula, so I had to keep like my finger on the pulse or whatever. I just started listening to news all the time, and you just realize how terrible everything is constantly.
Right.
But it's always been that way. We're just sort of better able to get the information now in a way that we profoundly didn't used to be. And it's up there in our face. But then one thing that sort of being somebody that's been obsessively following the news for a while that you realize are these cycles that happen. And that's one thing that I actually try to really get across in this book in relation to, in this case, uprisings in the Arab world. But I think it can be this broader idea of revolution always being unfinished business, that there's this media narrative that everybody wants to always latch onto when they see something happen in a foreign country on the news. And they're like, the revolution happened and either the baddies got kicked out or they didn't and the revolution was squashed. And like that's the end of the story. Like you start hearing about coronavirus or like Trump said a thing or whatever. And you move on. But these places keep existing and real people keep having lives in them. And a revolutionary movement and a revolutionary era can span a century, right? So, you know, like from the revolution in France to the actual establishment of enduring liberal democracies in Europe is like over 150 years. And so if you're dealing with in the Arab world, you know, this place that's coming out of this post-empire landscape, both with the Ottoman Empire and then later colonization and the post-war and the interwar and post-war periods, is dealing with like nationalism and these religious movements, all these things, and people want the story to be wrapped up really quickly. They want the Arab Spring to happen and for the good guys to win or the bad guys to like win, and then if the bad guys win, the story's over. And it isn't. I mean, these are ideas and strains of revolutionary thought are being born and networks are being built that have endured. I hope that done some work showing that they've endured at least since 2005, but before then, I mean, it's this incredibly complicated region with this nuanced history that's sort of reckoning with itself. And
and it's not just each individual country and place there, but they're all intertwined.
Yeah,
the entire Middle
sharing
East.
a language, sharing
it's not
culture,
you know,
sharing history.
The American news media tries to make the Middle East all sort of one thing,
Right.
and it's not. It's
well, and our
40
relationship with
things,
it as Americans.
Exactly.
I mean, we have had this profound relationship with the Middle East
Right.
since the discovery of oil
Yeah.
in Saudi Arabia, basically,
Yeah.
and Aramco. I mean, it's a history that is you can just sort of dip into and try to show an era of, and that's what I tried to do here.
Yeah.
But I think trying to find answers in it and conclusions from it is kind of impossible for the next 50 years. Like, nobody knows how these movements will shake out, whether people will see these revolutionary movements of this decade as ultimately successful or not.
Is this the difference between news and journalism?
I don't know. I think that...
I mean, because it seems to me that
Yeah.
news is all about trying to keep your attention so they can sell you commercials,
Yeah.
in a way, right? Whereas
Yeah.
journalism is getting to the roots and the causes of things. I don't know.
I guess so. I mean, journalism is a career, right?
Right.
So I do act as a journalist.
Yeah.
But you can also just follow things. I mean, that's also history, right? Like,
Sure.
at what point does it become the work of a historian?
Right.
I think that it's just always more complicated than the news broadcast will
Yeah.
have you believe. I had a big argument with somebody about this once at an academic conference. They were like, it's always more simple than they'll have you believe. And I was like, I will go to my grave dying telling people that it's
No,
always
even
more
the
complicated.
simplest thing
Anything,
is
yeah,
is
you
really
start digging into
complicated,
it, yeah.
Yeah. Do you, when you look at America right now, do you think that we could have revolution here?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by revolution. Do I think that we could probably have the establishment of like the social democratic welfare state that pretty much everybody else figured out like half a century ago?
Right.
Yeah, probably. Do I also think that at some point the American state will crumble into something else?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know when either of those two things will happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes it seems like tomorrow. Sometimes
Yeah.
it seems like never.
Yeah. I wonder.
Yeah.
I wonder because we.
I don't know if they'll be intertwined too.
Yeah. Right. Miles, please.
Yeah, speaking of domestic issues, I couldn't help but just feel while reading this, well, obviously there isn't violence in the streets here like,
Yeah.
during the revolution in Lebanon. But it just seems like in the parts where it's still and you're just waiting to happen, and we have the Senate basically saying the president's above the law, the president's saying I am the law.
Sure.
And it seems like we're heading in a very authoritarian direction. Do you think like there's any sort of parallels there between what's going on now and what's
Yeah.
going on in Beirut?
I think there's enormous parallels. I think that one of the most important things you can always do as a human is to try to project yourself into what other humans are feeling in other places. So the family that like fled Aleppo, it is in the refugee camps in like Idlib right now, being bombed by Assad, probably didn't think when they had kids in the 80s that the society that they knew and loved and that they thought was stable and that they could trust would crumble, that it would fall apart, that it would unravel. And that something else far more horrible would appear in its place. And so I think that that's always something that's really important to remember. And that, your grandparents that lived through World War II, their great-grandparents didn't see that coming. You don't know what's ever going to come, though. So it could be good, it could be bad. But I think that it's a huge privilege to be able to think that won't happen here. And I think that it's always a falsehood.
That stillness, just waiting for something to happen. That's what it feels like right now.
Yeah, I mean, I try at the end, I talk about Occupy coming and going the same year that the Arab uprisings were happening in 2011. I think that we're always a little less insulated from the movement of the world as we'd like to believe.
But Occupy did go, is the thing, and it feels like it's gone to me right now.
I don't know. Who's the front runner in the Democratic?
Oh, well, that's fair.
I'm just saying, like,
that's fair enough, but there are minutes that I think, like, why aren't people in the street right now?
Sure.
People should be in the street, you know? And
But one thing about history...
I'm not in the street, so...
But one thing about history is you never know where... Like, revolutionary moments and moments of occupation, they're not always, you know, they don't always lead to... revolution, moments of uprising, stuff like that can have these effects and these consequences that you can never predict, including, you know, this current weird political American moment. I really do think that Occupy has had a profound effect on American politics, even if it, you know, kind of fizzled out in this weird way. I don't know. I think that you also really, it's always going to be hard to talk about what those effects are until a couple decades later.
Sure, absolutely.
That's why I envy my cousin, the historian.
Right, yeah. All right, let's pivot to craft a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you work? What pen and paper?
All digital.
All digital, okay.
Yeah. These days on an iPad, running Sidecar.
Okay.
So I'm like mirroring my screen from a computer, but I've worked just on the iPad too, using Procreate. Usually I use Adobe Photoshop, which I learned when I was like 14 to make video games. Has been my
so you've always worked digital?
No, I was, so I used to work using pen and paper, but then in 2007, I was biking, and I was struck by a motorcycle, and it shattered my drawing arm in 3 places, and I have pins in there, and up there.
Wow.
And so I was working as a graphic designer at the time, still drawing comics, but either way, my arm was my work.
Sure.
And so I learned how to use a drawing pad because I could just zoom in and draw with my left hand at like 1,000%, really slowly.
Right.
And then I was like, there's an undo button, and that was it. My life was changed.
So you prefer it?
Yeah,
too.
no, man. I never even fucking
sketch.
sketch.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't even. I'll doodle. Sometimes I draw monsters. I doodle monsters when I'm bored. But I don't even like sketch real life stuff. I just draw it digitally.
Interesting.
So I sit in front of an iPad all day. And my computer, I have 2 screens. So
do you think there's an advantage or disadvantage other than like the physicality of paper and the physicality of I mean, I get the total joy of going, oh, take this panel, move it over here, but
no, I mean, I've been doing it since 2007, like pretty
it's been
exclusively
a long time.
since then.
Sure. Yeah.
Whatever, like, you know, connection I had to the real world has been lost in a sea of pixels. But I will say, I mean, I don't poo-poo like traditional tools at all.
Sure.
Like, you know, some of my best friends in comics still draw them the old way.
Yeah. How many steps do you go through? Because I've talked to many different artists who work digitally.
Everybody has their own way.
Everybody completely has their own way. So what's your actual process?
I go straight from thumbnail to inks.
Okay.
No pencil.
And are your thumbnails like sketchy, super loose?
Incredibly loose. I go straight into really tight inks because I use a lot of photo reference actually. Like myself posing and stuff like that a lot. And I'll make 3D models in like SketchUp.
Okay.
And so I usually have a lot of reference actually that I can just import into the thing. And so I just like freehand, you know, an ink because like you're drawing, you know, with the like dark pen tool anyway. You might as well just make it your own.
Sure.
And that's also a technique that I learned when I was freelancing, just to draw way faster. So I realized that if I cut out penciling, I was drawing like a third again as fast.
Right.
And so I started doing that to be able to take on more gigs and get paid more. Now it's just how I do everything.
And when you're doing a book like this that has a lot of real world stuff, are you taking photos and
so I mean at the end, and when I'm there at the end of the book, I was like taking a lot of reference photos around Beirut because I had gotten invited back there for this award that I was judging, and so I just brought my phone camera around and took in 2 extra days in the city, and I kind of had the outline in my mind by that point, and I photographed a ton of places.
Right. Are you putting more work into the script stage or the thumbnail stage? Like, what's your balance?
Well,
there?
I write the script first, and it's pretty. I keep rewriting as I thumbnail. Like it always keeps getting tweaked.
So it's
even
a living document, your script.
Yeah, even as I ink, because it's digital. So I keep moving stuff around even as I'm inking. And that's part of why I go straight to final inks, is because I am moving the layouts constantly. Like, there's pages in there that I was like rethought and redrew large chunks of like 10 days before publication. And I'll let myself not before publication, but before being due. Not before the book, but before like the manuscript was due. Usually, I'm not that insane about revisions. Like I'll stand by my old work.
And what's your editor editing? Are they editing script or are they editing
depends
thumbnails?
On the editor.
Or
I've worked with. So I work with editors as a journalist.
Yeah.
But then with book editors, I've had 3 different book editors. And they're all different.
Okay.
Anna, who did this book, is like super encouraging and really good at sort of like story contour stuff.
Right.
And doesn't really get like really into the weeds of like the visual things. Another editor that I worked with really does. And then when you do nib work, they are really very heavy on visual edits and stuff.
Yeah, because I always wonder that there's an awful lot of editors who are editing comics who don't have any kind of a comics background.
None of my book editors have. Yeah, both Anna DeVry from Picador / St. Martin's, and then my editor Julia at Chronicle are mainly
manuscript editors.
Yeah.
So is there a challenge, or do you think it makes the process stronger? I mean, I literally don't know the answer.
Julia was definitely more involved, the Chronicle editor, and I think that's maybe because Chronicle puts out more. Like Chronicle does put out comics and put out like picture books and stuff like that. So she might have had a hand in those before. I don't know.
How about when you're editing? What do you? Where do you want to be in the process?
It depends on who I'm working with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I had really, one of the things that's sad about the nib being funded less is that I get to edit less, because I had very close relationships with the cartoonists that I worked with, and somebody like this one cartoonist that I did a bunch of work with named Andrew Greenstone. I would just like send him to like these conferences, like a cyborg conference in Austin, and he like got a chip implanted in his hand, and I would just be like, write whatever, and he would write like a thing that was like way too long, and I would like cut it by 3/4, and then he would like finish it up in a Fugue state, and it would be amazing. And so he kind of, would require like all these different parts. And then somebody else, like they basically turn it in and it requires almost nothing. And then somebody else, they turn it in and it requires like a ton of editing, but not a bunch of like idea stuff. And so you get to know your people, basically.
There's not a way to make comics, right?
And there's not even, like I write comics too, and I also I've both worked as a writer and an artist for other people. So I've kind of been on all sides, an editor, writer, artist, and writer, artist. And everybody works differently, I think.
It's amazing to me, though, because I don't see other media that work like that. I mean, prose looks like there's a pretty path, and filmmaking, it looks like there's a path, and
I think filmmaking is constrained by its tools.
Yeah, sure.
And also by its like viewing, by like the way in which it's viewed, right? So it's like either consumed on like a screen, like on a screen, or in like a theater, like it's a passive medium, right? Those are its two constraints. And then prose, you can always, like the way you edit it is always sort of the same.
Right.
Whereas the way you edit comics can't be sort of the same, because the beast is always going to be different. So I think that's why it's like so weird to edit and deal with. It's because it's more unconstrained by its tools than film is.
Yeah.
But
I've interviewed like almost 150 cartoonists at this
Yeah.
point, and I don't think I've ever gotten
the same answer.
two people telling me the same. You
Yeah.
know, even just how do they do thumbnails? You know, it's amazing to me that comics are so idiosyncratic and so much. It's one of the things I love about them.
Yeah, totally.
Your lettering.
Yeah.
Is this?
Font.
It's a font that is
Yeah.
it from your own handwriting? Yeah.
Yeah, this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually made it a while ago. I need to fix it up. I was like looking at it the other day, and I need to like.
It's very clear.
Yeah, no, it's great, but I need to. Whenever like foreign editions of stuff happen, it doesn't have accents on it, and they want it, and I have to tell them no. So they like make their own, and so I should just make a new one with
Right.
accents and stuff.
Right. How about things like sound effects and stuff? Are these baked into the art itself?
Yeah, but on a separate layer, so that
Okay.
when it gets
So you
translated,
can
they
so you can take that
Yeah.
vroom and
Yeah.
but vroom is the same in every language, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, my books have been translated
Yeah.
to like Chinese and Korean and stuff
Right.
like that. So, you know, you don't have room.
Do you ever have any say in that, or you probably don't know enough about the languages to?
Yeah, I mean, so I speak French,
Okay.
but no, yeah. I wouldn't want to too. I have enough jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if somebody wants to publish one of my books in like a foreign language, I am deeply honored and excited by that, and that's basically where it stops for me. And I like want a copy of it, and I'll give copies of that book to friends of mine
Right.
or acquaintances that like speak that language
Yeah,
as
yeah,
like
yeah.
a funny thing that I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do. But I don't want to like make it my job to like give a shit what they're doing
Right,
in like the
right,
French
right.
Canadian version of whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as a mechanical process of making books, do you thumbnail out the whole thing and then pencil out the whole thing and then letter the whole thing and then tone the whole thing, or
I thumbnail, then ink. I thumbnail and then the lettering, because it's all digital, is
Yeah.
like in the thumbnails.
okay,
So it's right there. So
Okay.
actually, from an early,
Okay.
it's all there, and then I
yeah,
ink and then I gray tone.
okay.
After that.
Do you
And I
do the whole
keep them
book
all
sort of
separate.
page 1 to page X, or are
No,
you doing it?
I
in-
jump around.
Okay.
Yeah, each different time I do it differently.
Oh, cool, okay.
And each time there's like sort of a method to it, but it's mostly random. I'll like do parts when I'm tired that I think are going to be easy. I'll do
Right.
parts that are like big when I'm ambitious.
Yeah.
And then I'll do parts that are just interesting to me. Also, sometimes people want to publish like excerpts of things.
Sure,
and
of
so you like
course,
work
of
on getting
course,
something to
of course.
polish.
Yeah,
And then you end up with this like weird sort of galaxy
yeah.
of different finished pages,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I'll get excited about like finishing this sequence, and
Right,
so I'll
yeah,
finish
yeah.
like a 10 block
Yeah.
page sequence, and I'll get excited about that. And because I'm kind of like tweaking and fiddling with it as this happens, I'll realize I need to rewrite like
Right.
this, and I'll go back and stuff
Do
like
you,
that. So
do, you,
it's
do you hit a thing where you're like, oh, I don't want to tone those 15 pages,
um
or whatever? That was just an
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
I always wish that I had more time for things.
okay.
But I also have more things that I want to do, so I want to be done with things.
Right.
So those are the two impulses I think that like govern the tension in my professional life, is that I like have more stuff that I want to be doing, so I take on a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I don't have enough time, and then I get stressed out. But it's not like I don't want to like gray tone those 15 pages. It's just that like I then have to do like a project about coral reefs
Sure.
for like some fucking NGO,
Sure,
and like
sure.
I thought that I would have this, and then my kid got
Sure.
the flu, and then like
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
that's the thing.
So there's no part of comics that is
No, I
drudgery?
mean, no, not really. I mean, like there's different parts. Every part has its own challenges,
Yeah.
and there's low points with anything. And I
Yeah.
think with any career, there's low points.
Right.
And I think that pretending like a career in the arts doesn't have difficulty to it is dumb.
Sure.
In fact, I think the act of creation itself is kind of bipolar. Like when you're doing something this long, you have these periods where you're like excited about it, then you have periods where you hate it, and it's like tearing you apart, and it's like really difficult to work on. Then you have these like manic, like it's like the one thing that keeps you going, and you're chasing it. But the nice thing about comics is that each individual page is so incredibly complicated.
Right.
Because you're dealing with like I have 80 different things you're balancing on it, from the design of it to the wording to the tone to the craft of it. You can kind of always be like fiddling with it and honing it. So you just start doing that. You know, you like switch off when it gets too existentially doom and gloom to start drawing some fun stuff again.
As a cartoonist wife, is there anything that you observe from the outside in his process, one way or the other? You can say no. I'm totally calling you out. I know I shouldn't do that. I just.
No. I think that it is very true that you hate whatever you're working on at the end, and go through a period of thinking it's like really, really awful, and then come around to it again.
Yeah. And then gradually stop caring about it.
Right.
Like the funny thing about any book is that it comes out like 6 months after you've finished working on it. So I kind of had my existential crisis about this like a long time ago.
Sure. Well, and so that's actually a really interesting question between doing something like this and working on the nib, where I assume that the deadlines are a whole fucking lot closer to publication. Than the nib, right?
Like a week later. Yeah, sometimes days. Sometimes
days later,
the next day. Yeah.
Does that change the way you process work or think about work?
For some reason, I always find it difficult to care about anything that I do after I finish it.
Neat.
This included actually the story that was like so important to me that I spent 2 years doing that I still think is like a totally interesting thing for me to like page back through and stuff like that. I think because I'm always excited about what I'm doing next, I'm just like throwing myself into the next thing.
Well, that's a great transition for what are you doing next? Let's make some plugs here.
Yeah, okay. So I'm working on this book. The title, I think, is still up in the air, so I can't name its title. But it'll be, I think it might actually even come out next year, which is crazy. Either that or the year after. But it'll be in the YA market, and it'll be sort of in the vein of brief histories, these little pocket histories about animals and about humans and our relationship with animals, and trying to tell histories of humans and of technology and culture through domestication and pests, basically. So everything from raccoons to rabbits to mice to cows. And it's really exciting to me because I love animals. I grew up with animals. I had like 2 dogs, 5 rabbits, 2 snakes, 3 mice, 2 rats, a cat, 3 cats, countless fish. We had this like pet cemetery in our yard. My dad is a marine biologist, so I grew up at all these field stations surrounded by other biologists. So I love animals. And so I've spent the last like month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, I guess now, just reading intensely all this animal research and writing the manuscript, the script form for this book, and telling my family like new stories about mouse trivia every day. And it's been really fun. It's been such a welcome break to do something this fun and fun-loving. And also I think I'm kind of figuring out a way to tell like really interesting stories using this, idea of animals. Like it's this idea that I've had for almost a decade. I've had this idea of telling human history using domestication, and I now have a chance to do it.
Interesting.
So,
Okay.
So that's the next thing.
Who's that coming out from?
Little Brown.
Little Brown. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And then I'm also always publishing on the nib. So keep an eye on that. I'll have work appearing in the upcoming issue, the Power issue, which I think
Nice.
is coming out for the fall convention season.
Okay.
Our Animals issue, again,
Just came
featuring
out,
cover
yeah.
art by Lisa Hannawalt,
Yeah.
all these amazing
Yeah.
stories. Just came out for the spring convention season,
Yeah.
and it rules.
Cool.
And
Yeah, Jordan, let's get the URL for their Patreon up there too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So those are kind of the two big. Oh, and then I'm just going to go teach again. But
Nice.
the
Nice.
two big professional ways you can follow
Nice.
me are always follow me on the Nib, and then and I tweet infrequently.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that Patreon, that kind of thing, is legitimately a viable way for creators to make a living?
That seems amazing. Yeah, I mean I have a ton of friends that do it. I have never done it myself because I'm really shitty at social media, and that's just something I've kind of learned to accept about myself. And I figured out a way to have a career and not be that good at social media, which is very nice for me, and it's like an incredible privilege. But I think you have to be like a little better at self-promotion and social media to like do well on that platform. So it's not for me, but a lot of people it's for, and that and Kickstarter. And I think it's amazing that those tools are out there to support our community and give like young creators a place to make a living.
Yeah, very good, very good. Comics are awesome.
I agree.
And it's awesome that they are becoming what they can be.
Yeah.
We always thought they could be, but now they're actually becoming that thing.
Totally.
And I almost feel like we've willed it into existence.
Yeah, an amazing thing actually about comics journalism is that I am a generation that, so I grew up in the 90s, grew up reading Joe Sacco, started working as a professional in the aughts, the late aughts, and then really like my career is the teens.
Yeah.
I never, ever had to make the case to an editor that comics journalism was like a viable thing. Because like Satrapi, Alison Bechdel, Joe Sacco, like these giants had appeared, like Spiegelman, like had appeared, and everybody knew that like nonfiction comics and comics journalism were totally a thing, and it was fine. And so I just had to like talk to editors and pitch stuff, and that privilege is huge. Like just the trailblazing that happened just 10, 15 years ago.
No, I know. I opened in '89, and I feel like most of my life has been trying to explain to people why it's even slightly valid. You know?
Totally.
But now we're finally catching up, and so that's fantastic. Hey, this was a great book. This really was. It on the scope of it, on the just on everything. I really did love this book. And if you're watching this at home, if you want a good book to read that's going to teach you things about a different culture and teach you things about your own individual culture and where you are, and I cannot recommend this book enough. So that's this book. I want to thank you for coming out and talking to us about it. Next month, we go in a completely different way, and we have this will be our pick for next month. An Embarrassment of Witches.
Oh, nice.
And it's funny, and it's very, 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 very different. That's the thing I love about this is
Sophie
that we can have.
Back.
Oh yeah! Oh, excellent! Awesome!
Yeah, Sophie and I both went to CCS.
Yeah.
We were friends in grad school.
Yeah.
I've been her editor on like several stories at the
nice.
Nib. She illustrated a story that I wrote for the Nib about taking rocket ships to Mars.
Oh, cool!
That's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, cool! She's gonna be here. Sophie and Jen will be here on March 25th from 5 to 7, and then we'll be doing this again. So come back and you can sit in the audience and ask them questions. But otherwise, Spring Rain was our book this month. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I really want to thank you for coming and having this conversation with us.
Of course.
I love it, and I want to thank Jordan for doing the tech. I want to thank The Beat for sponsoring us. I want to thank Comix, goddammit. Thank you, fucking Comix. Well, I love comics, and so. Thank you. We'll talk to you next month. Woo! Yeah, give the woo. Right. Yeah. I can't.